Hey friends, welcome to Sabbath School Daily, where we have been studying from this lesson right here, Ephesians. This week we're studying from lesson number 11, which has the title, Practicing Supreme Loyalty to Christ, and today is Tuesday's lesson, which has the title, Slavery in Paul's Day. Today's lesson is one of the most controversial lessons that we're going to be studying in this quarter, and this quarter has a few of these controversial lessons. However, the topic today is one that we have to be very careful about studying, about learning, about teaching, and that we should pray always before trying to address this topic because it touches so many people in such an emotional way, as so it should, because this is the topic of slavery, especially slavery here in the days of Paul. But there's no way to really talk about this without laying a foundation on the topic itself, on slavery. You'll remember that a few days ago, I did give a little foreshadowing on what we would talk about when we got to this point. I want you to understand that throughout history, the concept of slavery has not been a static one. It's not been one that has always been the same. Slavery in different places in the world, in different moments in the world, has been something different each time. It's been one thing to one people, one thing to another people, one thing in one place, one thing in another place. That being said, I am in no way condoning the practice of any form of slavery in any place at any time. The lesson itself makes that disclosure where it says that slavery in no way is excusable. In no way is it justifiable. It is an evil wherever it has been practiced, and God will judge it accordingly. Now, that disclosure being given, I want you to understand, again, that the slavery that we're dealing here is not the slavery that perhaps you are thinking of or that you have understood in your studies of American history or your studies of European history. This is a specific form of slavery found in the Greco-Roman world. A few days ago, I told you that the slavery that existed within Israel, especially after they leave Egypt and they go on to live as an independent people, be that when they enter Canaan, be that when they prosper and they grow into a nation, the nation of Israel, that kind of slavery, as we find in the Old Testament times, was mostly an economic resource that was used to pay off debt. You'll see that, for example, in the book of Exodus, chapter 21. That is a really good example of the kind of slavery that you'll find in Israel. Israelites were forbidden of owning other Israelites. They could not. There was always the Jubilee year that would come around and that would then free and redeem those servants. There were lifelong servants that were servants taken from war, slaves that came from other lands and other peoples. That's a whole other conversation. But even then, the laws that came from God protected even these people. Masters could not kill their slaves. They could not torture them. They could not beat them. They could not treat them in those kinds of inhumane ways that we see in other places and at other times. That's the context of slavery inside of Israel at the time of the Old Testament. Again, this doesn't mean that God is condoning these things. You have to remember, in many instances in the Bible, God, he deals with bad situations. It's not always a choice between good and evil, friends. Sometimes the choice is between bad and worse. And so God here is doing the best in a bad situation. Now, when we arrive in the Greco-Roman world, there were none of these laws that truly protected the slaves. They were counted truly as property of their masters. The lesson makes it clear that in many instances, these slaves were able to have productive lives. The lesson includes the following information. It says, slavery in the Greco-Roman world could differ from the later versions in the New World in significant ways. It was not focused on a single ethnic group. Urban, household slaves were sometimes offered opportunities for education and could work as architects, physicians, and philosophers. Freedom sometimes occurred for these household slaves after a limited period of service, though most slaves never gained their freedom. In an attempt to acknowledge such differences, a number of recent Bible versions translate the Greek term doulos, which is slave, in Ephesians 6, 5-8, as bondservant. So you'll see that that was the context that they were dealing with, that Paul was dealing with. In many instances, it was better as an individual. And here, you have to understand that Paul, he is not speaking as a social revolutionary person. He's not trying here to revolutionize society. Here, as the lesson puts it, he's speaking as a pastor, dealing with individuals in the house churches in the city of Ephesus. And so as a pastor speaking to individuals, many of these individuals who were slaves, he was providing instruction as to how they could live the best in a bad situation. So you can see that that's his approach as coming from the pastor to the individual. But the lesson doesn't stop there. The text doesn't stop there. Because just as Paul instructs the slaves in how they should act regarding their masters, regarding those who are over them, you'll see that the apostle, he also subverts the whole notion, the whole concept of mastery. Because he also addresses the masters. He doesn't just address the slaves, he also addresses the masters. Look at what he says to them. This appears in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 9 that says, "And ye masters, do the same things unto them, and forbear threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no respect of persons with him." So when it tells us here, when it tells the masters, do the same things unto them, what are the same things that these masters should be doing as their slaves, as their bondservants do? Well, that appears earlier in the text from verse 5 onwards, where it says, "Servants, be obedient unto them that according to the flesh are your masters, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ. Not in the way of eye service as men pleasers, but as servants of Christ." Did you get that? As servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Doing the will of God from the heart. So you see that here the apostle, he's equating these servants and the masters as one. He's leveling them. He's bringing down the masters and he's elevating the servants, because under God, and it tells us here at the end in verse 9, that there is no respect of persons with him. What does that mean? That he doesn't consider one better than the other. He doesn't see one as better than the other. Unfortunately, later on, when they conquered the New World and committed atrocities against the natives, against the African slaves that they would bring, these were justified by that kind of theology, that there are some people that are better than others. So that came along later. Here the Apostle Paul is making it clear that there are no better. No one is better than the other. With God, there is no respect of persons with him. Again, what that means is that there is no one person that is more respected, less respected, no one that is better, that is less better. He is equalizing them. He's equating them as all slaves of Christ. Did you get that? So here, what the apostle is doing is he's completely subverting the entire pyramid of power that you would find in the Greco-Roman world according to the context of slavery. And that, friends, was revolutionary. When he equates them, when he brings them as one under the cross, under Christ, in the same body, do you remember? The whole context of the book of Ephesians, the context of unity, the concept of unity, that they are one in the body of Christ. So this is the apostle's contribution here. Another verse that I'd like to mention here with you comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 20 through 24. Look at what this says in the context of what we're talking about. 1 Corinthians 7, 20 through 24, that says, "Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman." Hold on to that. Then it says, "Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in the state in which he was called." So in essence, what the apostle is making clear is, first of all, he's not talking to them as a social revolutionary warrior, a fighter, or proponent. What he's doing is he's speaking to them as a pastor, saying, this is not the main thing in life. The main thing of life is finding your salvation in Jesus Christ. So for those who were called, who found Christ, or were found by Christ while slaves, they are Christ's freedmen. Those who are called to Christ while free are Christ's slave. Do you see the apostle here again, equalizing humans? There is no difference, friends. We are all one before God. We are all the same, in the same condition, the condition of sinners before God. So I hope that today's lesson did help you understand this context a little bit different, a little bit better. This is a deep topic, friend. Don't think that my little 10-minute video is going to give you everything that there is to be given about this topic. Go to the lesson, study the other verses that are mentioned here. There's quite a bit more, but also go read biblical theological books talking about the concept of slavery in the biblical times, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, also throughout the medieval times, the development and the evolution of the concept, and how it was, at least philosophically, morally abolished in the last few hundred years. Unfortunately, we know that slavery is still a thing in today's world, but it's not legal and it is fought against. So If you are in any way capable of doing so, help fight that battle as well. We are here, friends, to bring kindness, comfort, peace, and freedom, especially freedom from sin, the idea of sin, the notion of sin that pervades our world. That's our true calling. May God bless you in that. Also, please remember to comment down below if you have any questions or any commentaries. I'd love to interact with you. Please also remember to like, to share, and to subscribe to our videos. We release one every day, and I hope to see you again here tomorrow for another Sabbath School Daily.